The penthouse door slammed shut like a judge's gavel, and Lena Carter's life ended in that single brutal second. She didn't scream. She wouldn't give him that. Ethan Cross stood across the marble floor, a shadow carved from Manhattan's darkest corners, and smiled like a man who'd just claimed victory. But Lena saw something else beneath that cold expression. Something hungry, something dangerous. He said softly that her father took something from him, so he took her. This is a story about captivity, revenge, and the dangerous line between hate and obsession. The black SUV had come out of nowhere. One moment, Lena was walking across the Columbia University quad with her backpack slung over one shoulder, debating whether to grab coffee or just head home. The next, hands grabbed her from behind. They were professional, efficient, practiced. A cloth was pressed against her mouth, and a chemical sweetness flooded her lungs. Then there was nothing. When consciousness crawled back, it came with a pounding headache and the metallic taste of fear. Lena's eyes snapped open to unfamiliar darkness. Her body was rigid against soft leather. She was in a moving vehicle, with no windows, or they were blacked out. Her wrists weren't bound, which seemed almost insulting. They didn't think she was dangerous enough to restrain. That was their first mistake. She sat up slowly, testing her body for injury. Everything worked. Her phone was gone, of course it was, and her backpack had disappeared with it. The vehicle hummed beneath her, expensive and smooth. It wasn't a van, but something high-end, the kind of car that cost more than her entire year's tuition. Lena forced herself to breathe, to think. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She'd grown up around her father's world long enough to recognize the shape of this situation. Even if she'd spent the last 6 years trying to escape it, someone had taken her, someone with resources, organization, and zero regard for consequences. The question wasn't who. There were too many possibilities in Marcus Carter's past. The question was why now? After she'd severed every connection to that man and his empire of blood money, the vehicle slowed and then stopped. Footsteps approached from outside. Lena pressed herself into the corner, her muscles coiled. If they opened that door, expecting a terrified girl, they'd get something else entirely. The door swung open, revealing 2 men in dark suits. Behind them, the glittering teeth of Manhattan's skyline bit into a darkening sky. They were somewhere high up, very high up. One of them said in a flat professional voice for Miss Carter to come this way. It wasn't a request. Lena stepped out, cataloging details. Private elevator access. Marble floors that probably cost more per square foot than most people made in a month. Security cameras in every corner watched with digital indifference. The men flanking her weren't muscle-bound thugs. They were professionals, ex-military by the way they moved. Whoever had taken her wasn't playing games. They led her down a hallway that screamed obscene wealth. Original artwork was on the walls, with lighting that probably required an engineering degree to install. The silence was so complete it felt manufactured. Everything was designed to intimidate, to remind whoever walked these halls that they existed in a different world than the one below. The doors at the end opened onto a penthouse that made Lena's breath catch. Despite herself, floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped 3 walls, offering a view of Manhattan that made the city look like a jewel box scattered across black velvet. The space itself was massive, open concept, with minimalist furniture that probably cost more than cars, and a kitchen that looked like it had never seen actual cooking. Everything was chrome and glass and sharp edges. And in the center of all that cold perfection stood a man who matched it, Ethan Cross. Lena had never seen him in person, but she knew his face. Everyone in her father's world knew his face. He was the ghost story they told in whispered conversations. The name that made hardened criminals look over their shoulders, Marcus Carter's sworn enemy, the rival who'd been circling for years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Apparently, he'd found it. Ethan's was younger than she'd expected, maybe in his mid-30s, and he was disturbingly beautiful in the way that apex predators are beautiful. He had dark hair, darker eyes, and a face that could have sold cologne if it wasn't so obviously carved from something harder than bone. He wore a suit that probably cost 5 figures, fitted perfectly to a frame that suggested he was as comfortable with violence as he was with boardrooms. He studied her with the kind of focus that made Lena's skin prickle, like he could read every thought crossing her mind. He finally said her name, Lena Carter. His voice was cultured and controlled, like a Manhattan private school education layered over something rougher underneath. He told her she was taller than her photographs suggested, Lena shot back that he was exactly as much of a psychopath as the rumors claimed. One of the guards behind her shifted, but Ethan raised a hand without looking away from her. He told the guards to leave them. The guards retreated without argument, their footsteps fading down the hallway. The doors closed with a soft click that sounded too much like a cell door locking. Lena stood her ground, her chin lifted, refusing to show the fear pumping through her veins. She'd learned early that men like Ethan fed on fear and used it as currency. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. So she asked which part of her father's operation he wanted, or if this was just him being dramatic. Ethan's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. He said he liked that she was direct. He moved to the bar, because of course there was a bar, and poured 2 glasses of something amber. He asked if her father ever mentioned killing someone important to him. Lena replied that she and her father don't talk. Ethan brought her one of the glasses, but she didn't take it. He understood, remarking on the 6 years of radio silence. He called it admirable, cutting ties like that, walking away from all that blood money to pursue an education and build a legitimate life. He said it must have felt righteous. It felt necessary. And yet, Ethan continued, setting her untouched glass on a side table. Here she was, back in the world she tried so hard to escape. Lena stated flatly that she didn't come back. He dragged her here. Just details, he said. He returned to the windows, silhouetted against the city lights. He explained that her father took his brother from him 5 years ago, put a bullet in his head over a territorial dispute that could have been negotiated. He said Marcus doesn't negotiate, he escalates. He eliminates. He leaves bodies in his wake. Lena's jaw tightened. She'd heard whispers about that incident, filtered through the gossip network of her father's former associates. A turf war in Brooklyn, multiple casualties. She'd been finishing her senior year of high school, counting down the days until she could disappear into college and pretend Marcus Carter wasn't her father. She said she was sorry about his brother, and she meant it despite everything. But she insisted it had nothing to do with her. She hadn't spoken to her father in 6 years and made sure everyone knew she wanted out. "Oh, I know," Ethan said as he turned back to her. Something in his expression made her stomach drop. He explained that's exactly why she was here. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. She said he won't care, hating how her voice wavered slightly. She told him he didn't understand Marcus Carter if he thought he could use her as leverage against him. She wasn't his weakness, she was his embarrassment. The daughter who rejected everything he built, who turned her back on the family business. He probably celebrated when she left. Ethan told her she was wrong about that. When she asked how he would know, he pulled a phone from his pocket, tapped the screen, and held it up. It was security camera footage. Grainy, but clear enough. It showed her father's brownstone in Brooklyn, with a timestamp from 4 hours ago. In the video, Marcus Carter, older now, and grayer, but still carrying that aura of controlled violence, was tearing apart his study. He was throwing books, overturning furniture, and shouting at subordinates who cowered in the doorway. Lena couldn't hear the words, but she could read the rage in every movement. Ethan explained that he's made 17 phone calls in the last 3 hours. He's called in favors from judges, cops, and rival organizations. He's turning over every rock in this city looking for her. For someone who supposedly doesn't care, he seems rather invested. Lena stared at the screen, something twisting in her chest. She'd convinced herself over the years that leaving had been easy for Marcus, that he'd written her off as a loss and moved on. Seeing evidence to the contrary felt like touching a live wire. "So what?" she said, forcing steel into her voice. She accused him of kidnapping her to hurt her father and congratulated him. She asked what the endgame was, if he'd kill her and then her father would retaliate, continuing the cycle. Ethan pocketed the phone, looking almost offended. He said Detha is quick. Marcus needs to suffer the way he suffered, slowly, watching something precious slip away while being utterly powerless to stop it. Lena insisted she wasn't precious to him. He replied that she kept saying that, but he didn't think she believed it. He moved closer, close enough that Lena could smell expensive cologne and something darker underneath. Gunpowder, maybe, or just the scent of controlled violence. He laid out how it works. She was going to stay there, comfortable and safe, while her father tears himself apart trying to find her. Every day that passes, his empire weakens, his focus splits, his enemies sense opportunity. By the time he was finished, Marcus Carter would have lost everything that matters, just like he did. And what if she refused to be his pawn? Ethan's laugh was cold. He told her to look around. She was 30 floors up in a building he owned, surrounded by his people, in a city where he had more reach than the mayor. She didn't have the option to refuse. Lena met his eyes, saw the certainty there, and made a decision. She could collapse, could cry, could beg. All things he probably expected. Or she could show him exactly who Marcus Carter's daughter was, even if she'd spent 6 years trying to be someone else. She picked up the glass of whiskey he'd poured for her and threw the contents in his face. Ethan froze, amber liquid dripping down his perfect features, soaking into his expensive shirt. For a moment, nobody moved. Then he carefully wiped his eyes, his expression unreadable. He asked if she felt better. Not particularly, but it was worth it. To her surprise, Ethan smiled, a real smile this time, sharp-edged and genuinely amused. He said he thought he was going to enjoy this more than he anticipated. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, dabbing at his face. He told her room was down the hall, second door on the left. Everything she needed was already there. Clothes, toiletries, even some books he thought she might like. He mentioned she was a Columbia English major, right? And that he took the liberty of reviewing her academic records. "How thorough of you," she said. He replied that he's a thorough person and gestured toward the hallway. He explained that the penthouse is quite comfortable, with a full kitchen, entertainment system, and even a small library. The windows are bulletproof and don't open for her safety, of course. There's a guard rotation, but they've been instructed not to bother her unless necessary. So it's a gilded cage. He called it temporary accommodation until her father learns his lesson. How she experiences it is up to her. Ethan moved past her toward his own quarters, pausing at the threshold. He added one more thing, telling her not to try to leave, not to try to signal for help, and not to even think about doing something dramatic like smashing windows or attacking the guards. He warned that it won't work, and it will only make her stay more unpleasant. He asked if he was clear, crystal. Then he wished her well and said they had plenty of time to get to know each other. He disappeared into his room, leaving Lena alone in the vast, cold penthouse. She stood there for a long moment, processing everything. Then she walked to the windows and pressed her palm against the glass, staring down at the city far below. Somewhere down there, Marcus Carter was tearing his world, looking for her. Somewhere down there, her life, her real life, the one she'd built from scratch, was continuing without her. And up here, she was alone with a man who'd orchestrated her kidnapping like a chess move, who spoke about revenge with the same casual tone most people used to discuss the weather. Lena's reflection stared back at her from the dark glass. She was 24 years old, with dark hair tangled from whatever drug they'd used on her, her eyes too wide, and her face too pale. She looked scared. She hated that. Squaring her shoulders, she turned away from the window and headed for the room Ethan had indicated. If she was going to be trapped here, she needed to understand her cage. She needed to find its weaknesses, catalog its exits, and learn the patterns of her captors. 6 years ago, she'd walked away from her father's world, but that didn't mean she'd forgotten everything she'd learned growing up in it. The room was, as promised, comfortable. A king-sized bed with expensive linens, a walk-in closet already stocked with clothes in her size, which should have been creepy, but mostly just felt efficient. A private bathroom with a shower that probably had better water pressure than her entire apartment building. Books on the nightstand, a mix of contemporary fiction and poetry collections. Ethan Cross had done his homework. Lena sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had kept her sharp was fading, leaving behind a hollow ache. She should be planning, scheming, figuring out an escape route. Instead, she found herself wondering what Marcus Carter was doing right now. If he really was tearing his empire apart looking for her, or if Ethan had fabricated that to make his revenge more satisfying. It didn't matter. It couldn't matter. What mattered was getting out of here alive and intact. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Before she could respond, the door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s, neatly dressed in what looked like a housekeeper's uniform. The woman said, "Miss Carter, my name is Maria." She had a slight accent, maybe Eastern European. "Mr. Cross asked me to check if you needed anything. Dinner will be ready in an hour if you'd like to eat." "I'm not hungry." Maria's expression was kind but firm. "You should eat anyway. It's been a difficult day. I'll bring you something light. And if you need anything at all during your stay, please let me know. I'm here to help." She left before Lena could argue, closing the door gently behind her. Lena lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. She'd been kidnapped by a crime lord seeking revenge against her estranged father. And now his housekeeper was offering her comfort. Food like this was a bed and breakfast. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. Almost. The first 3 days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Lena barely saw Ethan. He was apparently busy running his criminal empire, which left her alone in the penthouse with Maria and the rotating cast of stone-faced guards. She tested the boundaries carefully, tried the doors, which were locked from the outside, examined the windows, definitely bulletproof and sealed, and attempted to engage the guards in conversation. They ignored her completely. The penthouse itself was a study in contradictions, luxurious but cold, spacious but claustrophobic. Everything she could want except the one thing that mattered, freedom. Maria brought her meals 3 times a day, always asking if she needed anything, always treating her like a guest rather than a prisoner. Lena couldn't decide if that made it better or worse. On the 4th day, Ethan joined her for breakfast. He appeared without warning, already dressed in another immaculate suit, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread. He sat across from her at the dining table where Maria had laid out coffee, pastries, and fruit, and poured himself a cup like this was completely normal. He asked if she slept well. Lena studied him over the rim of her own coffee cup, wonderfully. Nothing helps you relax like being held hostage. He replied that she wasn't a hostage, she was a guest. Lena pointed out that guests can leave. Fair point, he conceded. He selected a croissant, breaking it apart with precise movements. He then asked how she was finding the accommodations. She said the thread count is exceptional and really makes the kidnapping worthwhile. Ethan's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. He noted her sarcasm. She replied that it was one of her best qualities. They ate in silence for a moment. Lena watched him from the corner of her eye, trying to reconcile the man before her with the monster she'd built in her head. He was too controlled, too polished. Even the way he held his coffee cups suggested decades of etiquette training. This wasn't some street thug who'd fought his way to power. This was someone who'd been born into it, shaped by it. She finally asked what Marcus Carter thinks happened to her. Ethan glanced up. Officially, she disappeared. No body, no ransom demand, no evidence. Just gone. And unofficially, he knows it was him. Or at least suspects. He sipped his coffee. He made sure certain details would point in his direction, but nothing concrete enough to act on. He's trapped in uncertainty, which is exactly where he wants him. You're a real piece of work, you know that. He replied that he's been called worse. He set down Cynthia's cup, regarding her with that unsettling focus. He commented that she was handling this better than he expected. Most people in her situation would have broken down by now. Maybe she wasn't most people. No, Ethan said slowly. She was definitely not. Something in his tone made Lena's skin prickle. She stood abruptly, carrying her plate to the kitchen, even though Maria would probably scold her for it later. She needed distance, needed to not be under that intense scrutiny. She asked why he was really here, keeping her back to him. She pointed out that he hadn't spoken to her in 4 days, and now suddenly he wanted to have breakfast like they were old friends. He said he wanted to see how she was adjusting. Adjusting? Lena spun around. I'm not adjusting. I'm surviving. There's a difference. Ethan stood, moving toward her with that predatory grace she was starting to recognize. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to be intimidating but not quite threatening. He said quietly that she reminded him of someone. When she asked who, he replied, his brother David. His expression flickered. Something raw broke through the controlled surface before he locked it down again. He was stubborn too, refused to break even when breaking would have been easier. It got him killed. Lena said it sounds like they would have gotten along. He agreed that they would have. Ethan's jaw tightened. He was the good one, the one who still believed we could build something legitimate. He wanted out of this life, wanted to use our resources to go clean. I told him he was naive. Maybe he was just hopeful. Hope doesn't stop bullets. The words came out harsh, bitten off. Your father put 3 in his chest over a warehouse worth of stolen electronics. Didn't even do it himself. Sent his lieutenant like David wasn't worth his personal attention. Lena felt something twist in her chest. She'd spent 6 years separating herself from her father's actions, convincing herself that his choices didn't reflect on her. But standing here, seeing the raw grief in Ethan Cross's eyes, she couldn't pretend his victims were just abstract concepts. She said she was sorry again, meaning it more than before. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am. My father is a monster. That's why I left. And yet you carry his name. For now. I was planning to change it legally once I graduated. Start completely fresh. She laughed bitterly. I guess that's not happening anymore, he agreed. They stood there, separated by a few feet and an ocean of complicated history. Lena had expected rage from him, had braced herself for violence or cruelty. Instead, she was getting this. A man who was clearly suffering, who'd built an elaborate revenge plot because he didn't know what else to do with his grief. It didn't excuse what he'd done to her, but it made him human in a way that was deeply inconvenient. She asked what happens when this is over, when her father has suffered enough by his standards. She asked if he would just let her go. Ethan's expression was unreadable. He said he hadn't decided yet. That's not comforting. It wasn't meant to be. He moved past her towards the office. He told her to enjoy her breakfast and that he had work to attend to. He left her standing in the kitchen, more confused than before. A week passed, then two. Lena fell into a routine because the alternative was madness. She read the books Ethan had provided, discovering he had frustratingly good taste. She worked out in the penthouse's small gym, pushing her body until exhaustion crowded out thought. She learned Maria's schedule, the guard shift changes, and the layout of every room she had access to, and she fought with Ethan. It started small. Sarcastic comments during forced meals together, pointed questions about his business, and challenges to his justifications for keeping her here, but it escalated quickly into full verbal warfare. Ethan seemed to enjoy it, pushing back with equal force, matching her wit for wit. One evening, 3 weeks into her captivity, she told him he couldn't keep her here forever. They were in the living room. Ethan was reviewing documents while she pretended to read. It was becoming a pattern. Him working, her existing in the same space, both of them hyper-aware of the other. He replied without looking up that he didn't plan to keep her forever. Just long enough. Long enough for what? For my father to what exactly? Apologize? Bring your brother back to life. Now he did look up, his dark eyes sharp. Long enough for him to understand what he took from me. She countered that he already knows. You think Marcus Carter doesn't remember every person he's killed? He keeps score. Lena closed her book with more force than necessary. She told him his whole revenge plot was pointless. He wasn't teaching him anything. He was just traumatizing her to make himself feel better. Ethan stood, the documents forgotten. Traumatizing you? You're living in luxury. You have everything you could need. Except freedom, she shot back. Except my life. Except basic human autonomy. She stood too, facing him across the coffee table. She said the worst part is that he's so convinced he's the wronged party that he can't even see how he's become exactly like him. He insisted he was nothing like Marcus Carter. Really? She challenged. You kidnapped an innocent person to hurt someone else. You're holding me hostage to satisfy your need for vengeance. You've decided my life matters less than your pain. Tell me how that's different. Ethan's face was a study in controlled fury. He moved around the table, closing the distance between them, until Lena had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. She should have been afraid, and probably was on some level, but she refused to back down. His voice was dangerously quiet as he told her she didn't know anything about him. I know enough, she said. I know you're so consumed by grief that you can't see straight. I know you're punishing me for my father's sins because you can't actually touch him. I know enough. But Lena was on a roll now, with weeks of frustration pouring out. I know you're scared. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You're terrified that if you let go of this revenge, you'll have to actually deal with losing your brother, that you'll have to admit he's gone and you couldn't save him. Something flickered across Ethan's face. Pain, maybe, or recognition. For a moment, his careful mask cracked, and she saw the man underneath, younger than his years suggested, exhausted and haunted. Then the mask slammed back into place. He told her to go to her room. Excuse me? She asked. He repeated, go to your room. Before I say something, we'll both regret. Lena opened her mouth to argue, saw the warning in his eyes, and made a tactical retreat. Some battles weren't worth fighting, not when the enemy was already wounded. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation. She'd gotten under his skin. Good. He deserved it. But she couldn't shake the image of his face when she'd mentioned his brother. The raw grief there was barely contained. It reminded her of her own reflection in those first days after leaving home. The look of someone who'd lost something essential and was trying to figure out how to exist without it. She didn't want to feel sympathy for Ethan Cross. She didn't want to understand him. It made everything more complicated. Around 3 in the morning, she heard movement in the hallway. Footsteps past her door, then the soft click of the penthouse's main entrance. Curious, she crept to her window, angling to see the private elevator. Ethan emerged into view 30 floors below, stepping into a waiting car. At this hour, there was only one reason he'd be leaving: business, the kind that happened in darkness and left blood in its wake. Lena watched the car disappear into Manhattan's late-night traffic and tried not to think about what he might be doing. She tried not to calculate how many lives might end tonight on his orders. She tried not to remember that she was entirely at the mercy of a man who dealt in death as casually as most people dealt in spreadsheets. She didn't sleep after that. 4 weeks into her captivity, something shifted. Lena woke up feeling off. Not sick exactly, but wrong in a way she couldn't quite name. Her stomach churned. Her head felt light. Even the smell of coffee, usually comforting, made her nauseous. She chalked it up to stress. By the second day of feeling wrong, she couldn't ignore it anymore. By the third day, a horrifying possibility occurred to her. She tried to remember. That night, almost 5 weeks ago now, before the kidnapping, before everything went wrong. She'd been at a friend's party, had too much to drink, and ended up talking to a guy she'd met at a conference. One thing led to another. She'd been careful. They'd used protection, but nothing was foolproof. Lena sat on the bathroom floor, her back against the expensive tile, and tried to calculate. Her cycle had always been irregular. Stress made it worse. Between finals and then being kidnapped, she hadn't even thought about it. She needed a test, needed to know for sure before she could panic. But how did you ask your kidnapper's housekeeper for a pregnancy test? The answer, it turned out, was directly. She told Maria the next morning, keeping her voice level, that she needed something from the pharmacy, and it was personal. Maria studied her with knowing eyes and said she would see to it. She'd have it sent up that afternoon, discreetly. There was no judgment, no questions, just quiet efficiency. The test arrived hidden in a box of toiletries. Lena locked herself in the bathroom, her hands shaking as she opened the package. 3 minutes. That's all it took for her entire life to change again. 2 lines. Positive. Lena sank onto the closed toilet lid, staring at the test like it might spontaneously change its answer. This couldn't be happening. Not now, not here, not like this. She was pregnant, trapped in a penthouse by a crime lord, carrying the child of a stranger she'd met once and would probably never see again. Her father was tearing New York apart looking for her. Her real life was disintegrating in her absence. And she was pregnant. A knock on the bathroom door made her jump. It was Ethan's voice, edged with concern. He said Maria told him she wasn't feeling well and asked if she was all right. Fine, she managed, her voice surprisingly steady. She just needed a minute. She heard him hesitate outside the door. He offered to get a doctor, but she insisted she was fine. After another pause, his footsteps retreated. Lena wrapped the test in tissue paper and shoved it to the bottom of the bathroom trash, then splashed cold water on her face. Her reflection looked pale, shocked, younger than her 24 years. She couldn't tell him, couldn't tell anyone. A pregnancy made her vulnerable, a complication rather than just a pawn. It changed the entire equation of her captivity, and more importantly, it gave Ethan potential leverage over her that went beyond just her father's feelings. No, she would hide it, at least until she figured out what to do. The nausea made that difficult. Morning sickness, which was a misnomer because it lasted all day, hit her hard. She learned to keep crackers by her bed, to avoid strong smells, and to time her meals carefully. Maria noticed but said nothing, just quietly adjusted the menu to include blander options. Ethan noticed too. He observed one evening that she wasn't eating. She insisted she was eating fine. He told her to sit, pointing out that she just pushes food around her plate for 20 minutes. He said that's not eating. He set down his fork, studying her. He offered to bring in a doctor, a real one, not someone off the books. She insisted she didn't need a doctor. She searched for a plausible excuse and said she thought she was getting a cold from the recycled air. It was a weak lie, and his expression said he knew it, but he didn't push. Yet. The next morning, Lena woke to find Ethan sitting in the chair by her window, silhouetted against the early light. She asked how long he'd been there, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Long enough, he said. He stood, moving closer. We need to talk. Her heart kicked into overdrive. About the fact that you're pregnant, he said. The words hit like a physical blow. Lena's mind raced, calculating denials, but the expression on his face stopped her. He knew. Somehow he knew. Maria, Lena said flatly. He told her not to blame Maria, that she was worried about her. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, and Lena instinctively shifted away. He asked when she was going to tell him. Never, if she could help it. When he asked why, she said because it's none of his business, because it doesn't change anything. She stopped, fighting back unexpected tears. Hormones, probably. Everything made her want to cry lately. She admitted it was because she didn't know what he'd do with the information. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. He asked who the father was. She told him it was someone she met before he kidnapped her, that it doesn't matter who, he doesn't even know. It was one night, a mistake. He asked if her father knew. No one knows, she said, except apparently him and Maria. Lena hugged her knees to her chest, feeling protective. She asked what he was going to do. What he meant was he going to tell Marcus? Use it as extra leverage? Force her to. She couldn't's voice was sharp. I'm not a monster, Lena, whatever you think of me. You're pregnant. That changes things. When she asked how, he ran a hand through his hair, looking uncertain for the first time since she'd met him. He said he didn't know yet, but he wasn't going to hurt her, or he gestured vaguely toward her stomach. That. Lena wanted to believe him. She desperately wanted to believe that somewhere underneath the criminal mastermind was a man who drew lines, who had principles, but she'd learned early not to trust men who dealt in violence. She said quietly that she wanted to leave. Please, Ethan, let me go. I'll disappear, move across the country, change my name, vanish completely. You'll never hear from me again, and neither will my father. I can't. Why not? He replied. Because this isn't finished. But he didn't sound as certain as before. Lena said as gently as she could that his brother is dead. Nothing he does to her or her father will bring him back. She told him his revenge plot isn't actually about justice. It's about him not knowing what else to do with his grief. He retorted that she wasn't a therapist. No, but I'm right, she said. Ethan stood, putting distance between them. He looked out the window, hands in his pockets, his shoulders tight. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. He was all I had left. Our parents died when we were kids in a car accident. It was just the two of us against the world. I built this empire to protect him, to give us security, and he died anyway because I wasn't careful enough, wasn't ruthless enough. Marcus Carter saw weakness and exploited it. So now you're trying to prove you're not weak by holding me here, she said. Something like that, he admitted. Lena climbed out of bed, moving to stand beside him at the window. This close, she could see the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He looked younger somehow, less like a crime lord, and more like a man who'd been carrying too much for too long. Ethan, she said carefully, I understand why you did this. I even understand why you can't let me go yet, but I need you to promise me something. He turned to look at her and asked what. She asked him to promise that when this is over, however it ends, he'll make sure she gets out safely. She touched her stomach briefly, both of them. That whatever happens between him and her father, they're not collateral damage, he promised. How do I know you mean that? She asked. Because, Ethan said, meeting her eyes, I'm not Marcus Carter. I don't kill innocent people, even when it would be easier. They stood there in the morning light, two people trapped in a situation, neither of them fully controlled anymore. And Lena realized something that terrified her more than anything else. She was starting to believe him. The promise hung between them like morning fog, substantial but impossible to hold. Lena wanted to trust it. She wanted to believe that Ethan Cross was different from the men she'd grown up, watching destroy lives without a conscience. But trust was a currency she couldn't afford to spend carelessly, not when she was carrying a secret that made her more vulnerable than she'd ever been. The days that followed moved differently. Ethan stopped avoiding her. Instead, he seemed to orbit closer, showing up for meals with a regularity that felt almost domestic. He didn't mention the pregnancy again, but his awareness of it colored every interaction. The way he'd pull out her chair without thinking, how he'd switched from serving wine to offering her water or juice, the careful way he watched her as if she might shatter. It should have felt suffocating. Instead, it felt confusing. You're staring, Lena said one afternoon, not looking up from her book. They were in the library, a room she'd discovered 2 weeks into her captivity, lined floor to ceiling with books that someone had actually read, judging by the worn spines and dog-eared pages. Ethan had claimed the leather chair across from her, supposedly reviewing documents, but she could feel his attention like heat on her skin.
I'm thinking he corrected about how this
Changes the timeline. Lena's hand stilled on the page. What timeline? Ethan set down his papers, giving her his full focus. Originally, I planned to keep you here for 3 months. Long enough for your father to exhaust every resource, alienate his allies, and show weakness to his enemies. Then I'd let you go anonymously, safely, and watch his empire crumble from the foundation I'd already undermined. Sounds thorough. It was meant to be, he said. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But that was before I knew you were pregnant. You'll start showing soon. You'll need proper medical care, not just whatever Maria can arrange discreetly. Prenatal vitamins, ultrasounds, all of it. So, you're going to let me go? Hope flared in her chest, dangerous and bright. He replied that he didn't say that. Ethan's expression was unreadable. I'm saying I need to adjust the plan. Make sure you're taken care of properly while still achieving my objectives. Your objectives? Lena repeated, closing her book with deliberate care. You mean destroying my father? Yes. And you think you can do both? Keep me healthy and happy while using me as a weapon against him. I don't need you happy, he said. I just need you alive and unharmed. The clinical way he said it made something twist in Lena's stomach. She stood suddenly, needing distance, and moved to the window. The city sprawled below, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in its towers. Somewhere down there, Marcus Carter was hunting for her. Somewhere else, her life was becoming a memory in the minds of her friends, her professors, everyone who'd known her as something other than a pawn in someone else's game. She said quietly that she had plans. Graduate this spring with honors. Apply to MFA programs, Iowa, Michigan, maybe Columbia's writing program. I wanted to write, Ethan. Tell stories, create something that mattered. And now I'm going to be a single mother with a semester of unfinished coursework and a father who's a crime lord. You've destroyed every future I was building. She heard him stand, felt him approach. He stopped just behind her, close enough that she could feel his presence, but not touching. He said he knew, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like regret. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about that, but not sorry enough to let me go. No. Lena turned to face him. This close, she could see the details she'd been trying to ignore. The scar along his jawline, barely visible. The way his eyes weren't purely dark, but had flecks of amber in certain light. The tiredness that never quite left his face, no matter how well he dressed it up with expensive suits and controlled expressions. She asked what happened to him to make him like this. I told you, he said. My parents died. My brother died. This is what's left. No, she shook her head. That's what happened to you. I'm asking what you did to yourself, because there's a difference between grief and whatever this is. This systematic, calculated vengeance. It's not about missing your brother. It's about punishing yourself for not being able to save him. Ethan's jaw tightened. He told her she didn't know what she was talking about. Don't I? She retorted. You think I don't recognize self-destruction when I see it? I spent 18 years watching my mother drink herself numb because she couldn't face what she'd married into. I watched her slowly disappear into bottles and prescription pills until there was nothing left but a ghost in expensive clothes. Lena's voice cracked despite her best efforts. She died when I was 16. Heart failure, officially, but really, she just gave up, and my father, he didn't even slow down. He buried her on a Tuesday and had a business meeting that Thursday. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. He said he didn't know about her mother. Why would you? She asked. It's not like it made the papers. Crime lord's wife dies of natural causes. Not exactly headline news. She wiped at her eyes, angry at the tears. My point is, I know what it looks like when someone chooses destruction over healing. And you're doing the same thing my mother did, just with other people's lives instead of your own. It's not. Lena interrupted. It is. You're so focused on making my father suffer that you can't see your suffering more. Every day you keep me here, every move you make in this revenge plot, you're just reinforcing your own pain. Your brother would probably hate this. Don't, Ethan said sharply. Don't tell me what David would want. You never knew him. You're right. I didn't. But I know what it's like to love someone and lose them. And I know that the dead don't want us to destroy ourselves in their memory. They just want us to survive them. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them wanted to say. Finally, Ethan stepped back, putting professional distance between them again. He announced that the doctor will be here tomorrow, his voice carefully neutral. He's discreet, expensive, and very good at his job. He'll examine you, make sure everything is progressing normally, set up whatever care you need going forward. And if I refuse, she challenged, Then I'll have him sedate you and examine you anyway. Ethan met her eyes. I meant what I said. I'm not going to let anything happen to you or the baby, even if I have to protect you from your own stubbornness. He left before she could respond, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Lena sank back into her chair, emotionally exhausted. She'd gotten under his skin again, could see it in the way he'd flinched when she mentioned his brother, the crack in his controlled facade. But pushing him felt like poking a wounded animal. Necessary for her survival, maybe, but dangerous. Her hand drifted to her stomach, still flat, but not for much longer. In a few weeks, the changes would become visible. In a few months, there would be a whole person who depended on her. The weight of that responsibility felt crushing. She'd never wanted to be a mother. Not like this. Not alone, not trapped, not carrying a stranger's child in a penthouse prison. But here she was, and somewhere in the chaos of the last few weeks, she'd made a decision without consciously choosing it. She was keeping this baby, not because of any moral stance or societal pressure, but because something deep and irrational in her had decided this tiny cluster of cells was hers to protect, even from herself. The doctor arrived the next morning with a medical bag and the kind of poker face that suggested he'd seen things that would make normal people quit the profession. He was older, in his 60s maybe, with steady hands and eyes that assessed everything without judgment. He shook her hand and introduced himself as Dr. Reeves. He explained that Mr. Cross had asked him to provide comprehensive prenatal care during her stay here. Her stay? Lena repeated, aware of Ethan watching from across the room. That's a diplomatic way to put it. Dr. Reeves smiled slightly. He finds that diplomacy serves him well in his line of work. The examination was thorough and professional. He confirmed what Lena already knew. Approximately 6 weeks pregnant, everything appearing normal so far, though it was early yet. He prescribed vitamins, gave her a list of foods to avoid, and asked questions about her medical history that she answered honestly because lying seemed pointless. He concluded that she was healthy, young, and in good physical condition. Barring complications, she should have a straightforward pregnancy. He'd need to see her every 4 weeks initially, then more frequently as she progressed. When he asked if she had any questions, Lena asked how long she could hide it. Dr. Reeves glanced at Ethan, who'd remained strategically silent throughout the examination. He explained that it depends on her body. Some women don't show until the second trimester, while others start showing earlier. He estimated she had another 6 to 8 weeks before it becomes obvious to anyone who looks closely. 6 to 8 weeks, not nearly enough time. After the doctor left, Lena found herself alone with Ethan again. It was becoming their default state, circling each other in the vast penthouse, neither quite sure what to do with the forced intimacy of their situation. Ethan commented that the doctor was good, one of the best OB consultants on the East Coast. He's delivered babies for people who couldn't afford public hospitals and celebrities who couldn't afford scandals. Your secret is safe with him. Until you decide it's not useful anymore, she retorted. He replied that he gave her his word he wouldn't use this against her. And I'm supposed to just trust that? Lena laughed bitterly. You kidnapped me. You're holding me prisoner. You've destroyed my life. But sure, I'll trust your word on this one thing. Ethan's expression hardened. I know you have no reason to believe me, but I've never lied to you, Lena. Not once. I've been brutal, yes. Cruel, probably. But I haven't lied. That's supposed to make you noble. No, it's supposed to make you understand that when I make a promise, I keep it. He moved closer, and Lena forced herself not to retreat. He promised that her pregnancy stays between them, the doctor and Maria. He won't tell her father, and he won't use it as leverage. And when this is over, he'll make sure she has the resources she needs to start over wherever she wants to go. Why? She asked. Why would he help her after this? What's in it for him? Ethan was quiet for a moment, studying her with that unnerving intensity. Maybe I'm not completely beyond redemption. Or maybe I just don't want another death on my conscience. Even an indirect one. Does it matter? It matters to me. Then believe what you want, he said. But the offer stands. He left her then, disappearing into his office, with his phone already at his ear, back to the business of running a criminal empire. Lena watched him go, more confused than ever about the man who held her life in his hands. The weeks crawled forward with strange momentum. Lena's body changed in small ways. Her breast became tender. Her sense of smell sharpened to the point where Ethan's cologne made her nauseous. Her energy fluctuated wildly between exhausted and restless. She started wearing looser clothes, not quite hiding anything yet, but preparing for the inevitability. And somehow, against all logic, she and Ethan fell into something that almost resembled a routine. They ate breakfast together most mornings, trading sections of the newspaper in comfortable silence. He'd started asking her opinion on things like books, current events, and business strategies that didn't involve criminal activity. She'd started answering honestly instead of with sarcasm and was surprised to discover he actually listened. One evening over dinner, he told her she should have been a literature professor. They were eating Maria's exceptional pasta, and Lena had just finished explaining why. The Great Gatsby was fundamentally about the impossibility of escaping your past, regardless of how much money you threw at the problem. She asked why he said that. He explained that she lights up when she talks about books, really lights up like she's revealing secrets the rest of us are too blind to see. Ethan set down his fork. It's the only time you look genuinely happy here. That's because books are the only thing here that can't hurt me. Fair enough, he said. He paused. For what it's worth, you would have been brilliant at it. Teaching, I mean. You have that quality, the ability to make people care about things they didn't know mattered. The compliment caught her off guard. Thank you, she said. He told her not to sound so surprised. He can appreciate talent when he sees it, even if he's currently standing in the way of her pursuing it. She replied that at least he was self-aware about being a hypocrite. Ethan smiled, a real smile, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him look years younger. It's one of my few redeeming qualities. These moments were dangerous, Lena realized. These glimpses of the man Ethan might have been in another life, without the grief and violence that had shaped him. They made her forget briefly that she was his prisoner. They made her want to believe that maybe, somehow, the situation could resolve into something other than tragedy. But then she'd catch sight of one of the guards, or notice the locked doors, or wake up from a dream about freedom only to find herself still trapped, and reality would slam back into place. She was pregnant, held captive, by a man seeking revenge against her father, and every moment of normalcy was just another layer of her Stockholm syndrome developing. She couldn't afford to forget that, even when it became increasingly difficult to remember. The shift happened gradually, then all at once. It started with small things. Ethan asking if she needed anything, then actually getting it for her. Specific books, particular foods, even a new laptop so she could write, though it had no internet access. Maria mentioning casually that Mr. Cross had asked about Lena's comfort level, if the room temperature was right, if she needed different pillows for sleeping. Then came the night Lena woke from a nightmare, gasping and disoriented, and found Ethan in her doorway. He said he heard her scream, silhouetted against the hallway light. She insisted she was fine, just a bad dream. But she wasn't fine. The nightmare had been vivid. Her father finding her, dragging her back into his world, the baby crying in her arms while Marcus Carter explained in his cold, rational voice why she could never escape what she was born into. Ethan observed that she was shaking. I said, "I'm fine." He didn't leave. Instead, he crossed the room and sat in the chair by her window, maintaining a careful distance, but refusing to go. He told her to talk to him about whatever woke her up, saying she looked like she'd seen death. Lena pulled her knees to her chest, suddenly feeling very young and very scared. She told him she dreamed about her father, finding her, taking the baby, raising it in his world, turning it into another weapon in his arsenal. Her voice cracked. I can't let that happen. I can't let this child grow up the way I did, watching violence and calling it normal. That won't happen, Ethan said quietly. How can you promise that? She asked. You don't control what happens when this is over. No, but I can make sure Marcus never knows about the pregnancy. I can make sure you have the resources to disappear completely if that's what you want. He leaned forward. I told you I'd protect you. That extends to protecting you from your father too. Why would you do that? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough, with something Lena couldn't quite name. Because you remind me that not everyone born into this world has to stay in it. You got out. You tried to build something better. That takes more courage than anything I've ever done. She pointed out that she didn't get out, that he dragged her back. Temporarily, he said. He stood, moving toward the door. He told her to try to sleep. And Lena, you're stronger than your nightmares, stronger than your father. Don't forget that. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Lena lay back down, but sleep didn't come. Instead, she stared at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the man who'd kidnapped her with the man who'd just sat vigil over her nightmares. They shouldn't be the same person. But increasingly, she was discovering that people were rarely just one thing. Even the monsters were complicated. The next morning, she found a gift outside her door. A first edition of Toni Morrison's Beloved, in pristine condition, probably worth thousands. There was no note, but she knew who it was from. She held the book like it might bite, torn between throwing it back in his face and pressing it to her chest. In the end, she took it to the library and spent the afternoon reading, trying not to think about what it meant that her captor was paying attention to the offhand comments she'd made about her favorite authors. 2 days later, Ethan's world erupted. Lena was in the kitchen with Maria, learning to make pierogi, because she'd expressed a casual interest in Polish cuisine when she heard raised voices from Ethan's office. This wasn't unusual. His business often involved heated phone calls. But then came the sound of something breaking, glass shattering against a wall, and Ethan's voice sharp with rage. The office door slammed open. Ethan strode out, his face a mask of cold fury, already barking orders into his phone. He wanted everyone on this now. He didn't care what they were doing, he wanted them all pulled in. Someone leaked our storage locations to the feds, and I want to know who. He stopped short when he saw Lena, his expression flickering briefly before the professional mask slammed back into place. She asked what happened, unable to help herself. A business problem, he said. Nothing that concerns you. But his eyes told a different story. This was bad, possibly catastrophic. He ordered her to stay in the penthouse and not go near the windows. Extra guards would be on rotation. If anyone tries to breach the building, Maria knows the safe room protocol. You're scaring me, she said. He paused, turned back for a moment. Vulnerability flickered across his face. Someone betrayed me. One of my own people sold information to federal agents. 3 of my warehouses were raided this morning. Millions in inventory seized. Dozens of my people arrested. His jaw clenched. I need to fix this before it spreads. Will you be safe? The question surprised them both. Ethan's expression softened infinitesimally. Are you worried about me? I'm worried about what happens to me if you're not here, Lena corrected. But they both knew it was only partially true. He said he'd be back by tonight. Just stay inside and stay safe. He hesitated, then added, please. Then he was gone, the elevator descending with finality. Lena spent the day in a state of anxious waiting. She tried to read but couldn't focus. She tried to write, but the words wouldn't come. She tried to nap, but her mind spun with scenarios, each worse than the last. What if Ethan was arrested or killed? What would happen to her then? She told herself her concern was purely practical. Ethan was the only thing standing between her and whatever chaos might erupt if he fell. His protection was the only reason she was still comfortable, still safe. But when night fell, and he still hadn't returned, the fear in her chest felt distinctly personal. Maria tried to reassure her, saying, Mr. Cross has dealt with worse situations and he'll handle this. Lena asked how she could be so sure. Maria explained that she's worked for him for 8 years and has seen him navigate wars with rival organizations, federal investigations, and internal coup attempts. He survived them all. She patted her hand, adding that he's stronger than he looks, and smarter. But Lena couldn't shake the dread that had settled into her bones. It was past midnight when she finally heard the elevator. Lena had been curled up in the living room, refusing to go to bed until she knew Ethan was back. She told herself it was because she needed to know if her situation had changed, if new plans needed to be made. The truth was messier than that. Ethan emerged from the elevator, looking like he'd been through a war. His suit jacket was gone. His shirt sleeves rolled up and splattered with what looked disturbingly like blood. His knuckles were split and bruising. There was a cut above his left eyebrow that had stopped bleeding, but needed attention. You're hurt? Lena said, standing up. It's not my blood, mostly, he replied. He moved past her toward his office. You should be asleep. I couldn't sleep, she said, following him, unable to stop herself. What happened? He told her he found the leak and dealt with it. When she asked how, Ethan poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey, downed it in one swallow, then poured another. How do you think? The casual way he said it made Lena's stomach turn. This was who he really was. Not the man who bought her first edition books or sat with her nightmares, but the one who solved problems with violence and spoke about murder like it was paperwork. You killed him, she said flatly. He replied that the man betrayed 30 of his people to federal custody. He sold information that could have gotten them killed in prison. Yes, I killed him. Ethan met her eyes with no apology in his expression. This is my world, Lena. This is what it looks like when the pretty facade cracks. I know what your world looks like. I grew up in it, remember? Then you know why I'm not sorry, he said. They stood there, the gulf between them suddenly vast again. Lena wanted to rage at him, to call him a monster, to remind herself why she couldn't let these moments of humanity fool her. But she was also exhausted, pregnant, scared, and inexplicably relieved that he was alive. She heard herself offer to clean those cuts. Ethan looked surprised. He said she didn't have to. I know I don't have to, she replied, but infection is a thing, and you look like you went 10 rounds with a cheese grater. She gestured toward the bathroom. Sit down before you fall down. For once, he didn't argue. Lena found the first aid kit in the bathroom cabinet, her hands steadier than they should have been given the circumstances. Ethan sat on the edge of the massive bathtub, watching her gather supplies with an expression she couldn't quite read. The overhead lighting was harsh, unforgiving. It highlighted every shadow under his eyes, every line of exhaustion carved into his face. She warned him that this was going to sting as she dampened a cloth with antiseptic. I've had worse, he replied. She didn't doubt it. Up close, she could see other scars she'd never noticed. A thin line along his collarbone, visible where his shirt had come unbuttoned, and what looked like a bullet wound on his left shoulder, old and puckered. His body was a map of violence he'd survived. The cloth touched the cut above his eyebrow, and Ethan hissed slightly, but didn't pull away. Lena worked carefully, cleaning the wound with a gentleness that surprised her. His blood stained the white cloth rust red, and she tried not to think about whose blood covered his shirt, whose life had ended tonight on his orders. He repeated that she didn't have to do this. You already said that. I mean it. I'm not your responsibility. No, Lena agreed, moving to his split knuckles. But apparently, I'm yours whether I like it or not. So maybe this is just evening the scales. His right hand was worse than the left. 2 knuckles were split deep enough that they'd need butterfly bandages. She cleaned each wound methodically, trying to ignore how warm his skin felt under her fingers, how his breathing changed slightly when she touched a particularly tender spot. She asked who he was, the person he killed tonight. Ethan was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, Vincent Russo, one of my lieutenants. I brought him up from nothing, gave him opportunities, trusted him with operational details most people never see. His jaw clenched. He sold me out for $200,000 and immunity for his cousin, who got caught up in an unrelated case. That's it. $200,000? That's it. 10 years of loyalty gone for the price of a decent car. Ethan's voice was flat, drained of emotion. The feds offered him witness protection. He was going to disappear, start over somewhere with a new name and a clean slate. Instead, he's in the East River with his betrayal carved into his chest. Lena's hand stilled. She asked why he was telling her this. Because you should know exactly who I am, what I'm capable of. He caught her wrist, not roughly, but firmly, making her look at him. You're standing here taking care of me like I'm worth saving, and I need you to understand that I'm not. I'm the monster in your nightmares, Lena. The thing your mother was trying to escape when she climbed into those bottles. I know what you are, she said. Do you? He asked, because sometimes you look at me like you're seeing someone else, someone better. Maybe I am, Lena said, pulling her hand free and returning to his wounds. Maybe I'm seeing the person you could have been if your brother hadn't died, if you'd chosen differently. There are no different choices, not in this life. There are always choices. You just don't like the alternatives. She applied butterfly bandages to his knuckles with practiced efficiency, a skill learned from patching up her father's men when she was too young to know better. Back when she still thought Marcus Carter's world could be redeemed with enough love and willful blindness. She mentioned her mother used to do this, more to fill the silence than anything. She'd patch up her father's people after they'd been in fights. She'd sit them down in our kitchen, clean their wounds, and send them back out into the night. I never understood it, why she'd help the people who were destroying our family. But now, I think maybe she was just trying to convince herself they were human, that if they could bleed, they could also choose not to make others bleed. Did it work? He asked. No, she replied. She still drank herself to death, and they still destroyed everything they touched. Lena met his eyes. But maybe she was asking the wrong question. Maybe it's not about whether they're human. Maybe it's about whether we stay human even when surrounded by monsters. And you think you can stay human here with me? I don't know yet, she said. She pressed the last bandage into place. But I'm going to try. Ethan caught her hand again, this time holding it gently against his damaged knuckles. He said she terrified him. Good, she replied. You terrify me too. No, I mean it. You terrify me because I'm starting to care whether you hate me. I'm starting to want to be the person you see sometimes instead of the one I actually am. His thumb traced her wrist, finding her pulse. That's dangerous for both of us. Lena should have pulled away, should have reminded him that he was her captor, that whatever this was building between them was toxic and wrong. But his touch was gentle, his eyes vulnerable in a way she'd never seen, and she was so tired of fighting every instinct that told her he was more complicated than the role he'd cast himself in. Then, maybe we're both in trouble, she said softly. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Then Ethan released her hand and stood, putting distance between them with what looked like physical effort. He told her to get some sleep, his voice rough. Tomorrow, I need to deal with the fallout from tonight. It's going to get messy. Messier than murder, she asked. Much messier. The feds are going to push harder now that they got a taste. My enemies are going to see opportunity. And your father? He stopped, something flickering across his face. When she asked about her father, he said he was getting desperate, making reckless moves, calling in favors he shouldn't spend. Someone's going to notice the pattern, figure out I'm behind his distraction. Ethan moved to the doorway, which means the timeline is accelerating whether I want it to or not. She asked what that meant for her. He said he didn't know yet, but he promised she'd be the first to know when he figured it out. He left her standing in the bathroom, first aid supplies scattered across the counter, her heart beating too fast for comfort. She cleaned up mechanically, her mind spinning. Ethan was right. Something was shifting between them, something that couldn't exist in the simple captor-captive dynamic they'd started with. She should be planning her escape. Instead, she was memorizing the feeling of his skin under her fingertips, the vulnerability in his eyes, the way he'd said she terrified him like it was a confession. This was how it happened. She realized this was how people got lost in Stockholm Syndrome, in trauma bonds, in relationships that had no right to exist, not all at once with dramatic revelations, but slowly, in moments of unexpected humanity that made you forget the bars of your cage. She pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling nothing yet, but knowing life was growing there regardless. Whatever happened next, she had more than just herself to protect. Now, she couldn't afford to lose herself in Ethan Cross's complicated darkness, no matter how human he seemed in unguarded moments. But as she lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd held her hand, like she was something precious, something worth protecting even from himself. The next week brought chaos in waves. Federal agents swarmed Ethan's legitimate businesses, looking for connections to the warehouses they'd raided. 3 of his associates were arrested on unrelated charges that felt suspiciously coordinated. Someone torched one of his clubs in Queens, sending a message that his vulnerability was showing. Through it all, Ethan worked with a focused intensity that bordered on obsessive. Lena watched him from the margins of the penthouse. She saw him on phone calls that lasted hours, in meetings with stone-faced men who spoke in careful code, and in strategy sessions with his remaining lieutenants that sometimes went until dawn. He was fighting a war on multiple fronts, and he was losing ground. One night, Lena found him in his office at 3 a.m. and told him he needed to sleep. He countered that he needed to shore up their Western operations before the Italians decided now was a good time to test his defenses, not looking up from his laptop screen. You're not going to shore up anything if you collapse from exhaustion, she said. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're running on coffee and spite, and you look like death. Lena crossed the office and closed his laptop despite his protest. Whatever you're working on can wait 6 hours. Sleep. Actually sleep. Not that thing where you close your eyes for 90 minutes and call it rest. Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face. The bandages on his knuckles were starting to peel at the edges. He asked when she became so concerned about his well-being. She replied that it was when she realized that if he burns out, she's stuck here with whatever power vacuum opens up in his absence. It was a lie, or at least not the whole truth, but it was easier than admitting she actually cared. He asked if it was pure self-interest. She confirmed it was, but the way he looked at her suggested he knew better. Fine, 6 hours, he said. But if the Morellis make a move while I'm sleeping, Maria will wake you and you'll deal with it. She told him the world won't end because he took care of himself for one night. She held out her hand and told him to come on. He took it, letting her pull him to his feet. He swayed slightly, exhaustion finally catching up now that he'd stopped fighting it. Lena steadied him without thinking, her hand on his chest, and felt his heart racing under her palm. She said quietly that he was going to make himself sick. Probably, he replied. He covered her hand with his, holding it there. But I don't have the luxury of slowing down, not now when everything's falling apart. Even empires need maintenance, otherwise they crumble from the inside. He asked if that was her professional opinions as a literature major. She said it was her observation, as someone who watched her father's organization eat itself alive from internal rot. Lena stepped back, breaking contact. Go to bed, Ethan. The war will still be there in the morning. He went, too tired to argue further. Lena watched him disappear into his bedroom, then returned to her own room and lay awake, listening to the city breathe below. Somewhere out there, Marcus Carter was tearing himself apart, looking for her. Somewhere else, federal agents were building cases that would never reach trial because the people they targeted played by different rules. And up here, she was caught in the middle of it all, her fate tied to a man who was barely holding his world together. Her hand drifted to her stomach again, a gesture that was becoming habitual. 8 weeks now. Soon she'd start showing, and then hiding would become impossible. She needed a plan. She needed to figure out how she was going to survive whatever came next. But planning required knowing what Ethan intended to do with her, and increasingly she suspected he didn't know anymore either. 3 days later, everything changed. Lena woke to the sound of breaking glass and shouting. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then another crash closer and the unmistakable sound of gunfire. She rolled out of bed, her heart hammering, looking around for something she could use as a weapon. The door burst open and Maria appeared, her face pale. She said urgently, "The safe room, now." When Lena asked what was happening, Maria told her the Morelli family was here. Maria grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the hallway. "Mr. Cross is handling it, but we need to get you somewhere secure." More gunshots, rapid fire from the direction of the living room. Lena heard Ethan's voice, sharp with command, coordinating his guards. Then an explosion, small but close, that rattled the windows and made the floor shake. Maria dragged her to what Lena had thought was a linen closet. Instead, it opened to reveal a steel door with a keypad. Maria entered a code, yanked it open, and shoved Lena inside. She told her to stay there and not to open the door for anyone except her or Mr. Cross. When she asked if Lena understood, Lena confirmed she did. The door slammed shut, heavy locks engaging with mechanical finality. Lena was alone in darkness, her breathing loud in the enclosed space. She felt along the wall, found a light switch, and illuminated a room about 10 feet square. It was an actual, honest-to-God panic room in the middle of a Manhattan penthouse. The shelves were stocked with water and non-perishable food, a first aid kit, and a phone with a direct line to 911, and what was probably Ethan's personal cell. Outside, the sounds of violence continued. Gunfire, shouting, something heavy crashing into something else. Lena pressed her ear to the door, trying to make sense of the chaos, her imagination supplying horrifying details her hearing couldn't confirm. What if Ethan was hurt? What if the attackers breached the penthouse completely? What if they found this room? What if she never got out? Her breath came faster, panic clawing at her throat. She forced herself to sit, to breathe slowly, to count backward from 100 like her therapist had taught her years ago when anxiety attacks started. The baby. She had to stay calm for the baby. Stress was bad for development. She'd read that in one of the pregnancy books Dr. Reeves had provided. The absurdity of worrying about fetal development, while people were actively shooting at each other, almost made her laugh. Almost. Time became strange in the safe room. It could have been 20 minutes or 2 hours. The sounds outside eventually faded to silence, which was somehow worse than the violence. Silence meant it was over, but not which side had won. Then a knock on the door. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. Some kind of code. It was Ethan's strained voice. "It's me. Open the door." She scrambled to the keypad and realized she didn't know the code from this side. He told her there was a green button on the bottom right. She found it and pressed it. The locks disengaged with a heavy clunk. The door swung open to reveal Ethan, alive but bloodied. His shirt was torn, revealing a fresh wound on his left side that was bleeding steadily. His face was spattered with blood, his own or someone else's, impossible to tell. He immediately asked if she was hurt. She said no, she was fine, but pointed out that he was bleeding. "It's a flesh wound," he said. "I've had worse." But he swayed as he said it, and Lena caught him before he could fall. "Jesus, Ethan." She maneuvered him toward the penthouse proper, supporting more of his weight than she should have been able to manage. "Adrenaline, probably." She asked what happened. "The Morellas thought I was weak enough to take. They were wrong." He grimaced as she lowered him onto the couch. "Most of them won't make that mistake again." "Most of them?" "We took 2 prisoners. They're currently secured in the building and being questioned about who sent them." His hand pressed against his side, blood seeping between his fingers. It wasn't just a random attack. Someone gave them intel. My schedule, the guard rotation, access codes. We have another leak. Lena grabbed towels from the bathroom, pressing them against his wound. The bleeding was steady, but not arterial. Good, probably. Her medical knowledge was limited to what she'd picked up from TV and her mother's amateur nursing of her father's people. He needed a hospital, but he said he couldn't go because there would be too many questions. He caught her hand and told her to call Dr. Reeves. His number was in his phone. She found his phone, miraculously undamaged despite the chaos, and made the call. Dr. Reeves answered on the second ring, unsurprised by the emergency, and promised to arrive within the hour. Meanwhile, Lena did what she could to keep Ethan conscious and the bleeding controlled. The penthouse was a disaster. There were bullet holes in the walls and shattered glass everywhere. Furniture was overturned. 2 bodies covered with sheets were near the entrance. Ethan's guards, she assumed, though she didn't ask. The windows had held despite everything, a testament to whatever bulletproof material they were made from. Maria appeared from somewhere, miraculously unharmed, and took over managing the cleanup, while Lena focused on Ethan. His color was getting worse, his skin clammy. The towels were soaked through, and she grabbed more, pressing harder, trying to remember if you were supposed to elevate wounds or keep them flat. "Stay with me," she said, more sharply than intended. "Don't you dare pass out, bossy," he mumbled. But his eyes were unfocused, his breathing shallow. "Ethan, look at me." She cupped his face, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Stay awake. Talk to me. Tell me something." "Like what?" "Anything. Your favorite color. Your first pet. The last movie you saw. Just keep talking." "Blue," he said, the word slurring slightly. "My favorite color is blue. Like the ocean David and I saw once in Greece. We were teenagers, running from a job that went wrong. Ended up on this beach at sunrise. The water was so blue it didn't look real." "Good. What else? Tell me about Greece." He did, his voice growing weaker but staying conscious. He told her about stealing a boat, about swimming in water so clear you could see 30 feet down, about eating fish they had caught themselves while hiding from the people who wanted them dead. He told her about David laughing, always laughing, even when things were terrible. By the time Dr. Reeves arrived, Ethan had talked himself hoarse, but he was still conscious. The doctor took one look at the wound, at the amount of blood, and set to work with grim efficiency. He told Lena to get out, that she didn't need to see this. "I'm staying," she said. "Miss Carter." "I said I'm staying." She met his eyes with a stubbornness she'd learned from years of refusing to bend to her father's will. "He stayed conscious for me. I'm staying conscious for him." Dr. Reeves sighed but didn't argue further. The next 30 minutes were brutal. Lena held Ethan's hand while the doctor cleaned the wound. A bullet had grazed his side, tearing a furrow through muscle but missing anything vital. Lucky, in the way that getting shot could be lucky, Doctor. Reeves stitched him up with steady hands, administered antibiotics, and something for the pain that made Ethan's eyes glaze slightly. When he was finished, the doctor told him he needed to rest, with no strenuous activity for at least 2 weeks. The stitches would dissolve on their own, but if he saw any signs of infection, he should call him immediately. "I can't rest," Ethan said. "Too much to do. Then you'll tear the stitches and make everything worse," Dr. Reeves replied, packing up his equipment. "Mr. Cross, I've been patching you up for 6 years now. For once, listen to me. Rest. Let your body heal. The Empire can wait 48 hours. He left with Maria to see himself out, leaving Lena alone with Ethan in the ruins of the penthouse. Dawn was breaking outside the windows, painting the city in shades of gold and pink that seemed obscene given the violence of the night. "You should have left," Ethan said, his voice thick from the pain medication. "When Maria put you in the safe room, you should have stayed there. Let me deal with this alone. And if you died, what would have happened to me then?" Maria has instructions. She would have gotten you out, given you resources to disappear. His eyes were half closed, fighting the drugs. You'd have been free. I don't want to be free if it means watching you die. The words hung between them, too honest, too revealing. Ethan's hand tightened on hers. Lena, don't. Don't say whatever you're about to say. She stood, needing distance before she admitted something even more damaging. You need sleep. Real sleep, not medicated unconsciousness. Can you make it to your room? Probably not. Then stay here. I'll keep watch. Yeah, I don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'm doing it anyway. She grabbed a blanket from the closet and draped it over him. Sleep, Ethan. I'll wake you if anything happens. He fought it for a few more minutes, but the medication and exhaustion won. His breathing evened out, his face relaxing into something younger, less guarded. Lena settled into the chair across from him, watching the rise and fall of his chest, and tried to understand when exactly she'd started caring whether he lived or died. The truth was uncomfortable. She'd been caring for weeks now, maybe longer. She'd just been too stubborn to admit it. The morning after the attack felt like waking into a different world. Sunlight cut through the bullet-scared windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like tiny ghosts. Lena had dozed fitfully in the chair, jerking awake every time Ethan's breathing changed, every time a sound echoed from elsewhere in the building. Now, in full daylight, the damage looked worse. Not just the physical destruction, but the violation of it. This penthouse had been her prison, yes, but it had also been safe. That illusion was shattered along with the glass. Ethan stirred on the couch, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. His eyes opened and found her immediately. You actually stayed, he said, his voice rough with sleep and medication residue. I said I would. People say a lot of things. He pushed himself upright with visible effort, his jaw tightening against the pain. He asked how long he was out. 5 hours, maybe 6. Lena stood, her back protesting from the awkward angle she'd slept in. She told him Dr. Reeves said he needed rest, and that he should lie back down. Can't. I need to debrief my people. Figure out who the second leak is. Coordinate repairs. He tried to stand and made it halfway before his legs buckled. Lena caught him, supporting his weight as she had the night before. What you need to do is not rip your stitches open like an idiot. Sit down. I don't have time. Make time. She maneuvered him back to the couch more forcefully than necessary. Your empire survived one night without you. It'll survive a few more hours while you heal enough to function. Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but the pain won. He sank back into the cushions, breathing carefully. He said he wasn't used to people telling him what to do. Get used to it, she replied, at least until those stitches hold. She went to the kitchen, stepping around broken glass, and returned with water and the pain medication Dr. Reeves had left. She told him to take them. He did, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He commented that she was different this morning. How? She asked. He said she seemed less afraid of him, more willing to push back. Maybe I realized that if you were going to hurt me, you would have done it already. Lena sat on the coffee table, close enough to monitor him, but maintaining some distance. Or maybe watching you nearly bleed out made me stop caring about the power dynamic. It's hard to be intimidated by someone you've seen unconscious and vulnerable. He responded that's usually when people are most dangerous, when they're wounded and cornered. She asked if he was dangerous right now. Ethan was quiet for a moment, studying her. Not to you, never to you. Words landed between them with unexpected weight. Lena felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the walls she'd been maintaining between captor and captive. Between enemy and what? She didn't have a word for what Ethan was becoming. The baby, Ethan said suddenly. Last night during the attack, is everything. We're fine, she said. Her hand moved to her stomach, protective. Dr. Reeves checked. No complications. Stress isn't ideal, but the pregnancy is still progressing normally. A flicker of relief crossed his face, quickly hidden, but not quickly enough. Good. That's good. Why do you care? She asked. About the baby? About me? Lena leaned forward, needing to understand. You kidnapped me for revenge. You've kept me here for 2 months now, but you've also protected me, bought me books, made sure I had medical care, and risked your life last night to keep me safe. Those things don't fit together. So, which is it? Am I your prisoner or something else? Ethan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost hesitant. I don't know anymore. You were supposed to be simple, a tool, a means to an end. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being Marcus Carter's daughter and started being just Lena. A woman reading Morrison in my library. Someone who argues with me about philosophy over breakfast. A person who's carrying a child and trying to figure out how to survive a situation she never asked for. And that matters to you? That I'm a person? He admitted that it shouldn't, but it does. He met her eyes. You matter to me. That wasn't supposed to happen. Lena's breath caught. She should stand up, put distance between them, remind them both that this was temporary and toxic and built on a foundation of violence. Instead, she stayed where she was, caught in the gravity of his admission. She asked quietly what he was going to do, about his revenge, about her, about all of this. I don't know, he said. The plan was clear when I started. Destroy Marcus Carter piece by piece. Make him understand what he took from me. But now, he stopped, frustrated. Now there are too many variables. The federal investigation, the Morelli attack, the leak in my organization, and you, pregnant and trapped here because of choices I made. So let me go. I can't. Why not? If I'm not just a tool anymore, if I actually matter to you, then let me walk away. I'll disappear, change my name, move somewhere your father will never find me. You'll get what you wanted, him suffering knowing I'm gone, and I'll get my life back. Ethan's expression was pained. You think I haven't considered that? But it's not that simple. If I release you now, Marcus will know I broke. He'll see it as weakness and use it as leverage. And worse. He stopped himself. Worse what? Worse, I don't trust that he won't find you anyway. He has resources I can't match in some areas. Connections in law enforcement, federal agencies, private security firms. If you run, he'll hunt you. And when he finds you, when he discovers you're pregnant, what do you think he'll do? The question hung in the air like smoke. Lena had been trying not to think about that particular nightmare scenario. Marcus Carter learning about the baby, deciding it was leverage or legacy or some twisted second chance controlling a child who'd rejected him. He doesn't get to know, she said firmly. That's non-negotiable. Whatever happens, he doesn't find out about the pregnancy. Agreed. Which means you need to stay somewhere he can't reach you. Somewhere protected. You mean here? You're prisoner. I mean here. My responsibility. Ethan's hand found hers. His grip surprisingly gentle, given the violence those hands were capable of. I know you hate this. I know you want your freedom, your old life, everything I took from you. But right now, this penthouse is the safest place for you. My people are loyal. Well, most of them. The ones who aren't are being identified and removed. And I will die before I let anyone hurt you or that baby. You almost did die last night. But I didn't. And the people who tried won't get another chance. His jaw set with determination. I'm going to fix this, Lena. The leaks, the federal investigation, the threat to my organization. And then we'll figure out what comes next for both of us. It wasn't a promise to release her, but it wasn't a promise to keep her forever either. It was something in between, as complicated and messy as everything else between them had become. Okay, Lena heard herself say, but I need something from you. When he asked what, she said the truth about the pregnancy, about why he really cared. She squeezed his hand, making him focus, because she needed to know if this was genuine, or if he was just protecting his investment. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing patterns on her wrist. He explained that when she told him she was pregnant, his first thought was that it complicated everything, more vulnerable, harder to use effectively. His second thought was that it made her off-limits entirely, that even for revenge, he couldn't justify hurting someone who was carrying an innocent life. And his third thought? That he wanted to protect her, not because of strategy or revenge or any rational reason, just because he looked away, his jaw working, because my brother wanted kids someday. He wanted to be the kind of father our dad never got to be. And I realized that if I let anything happen to you or your child, I'd be destroying the future David wanted to exist. I'd be choosing violence over life, just like Marcus did when he killed him. Tears pricked at Lena's eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She said that was a lot of weight to put on an accidental pregnancy. I know. I'm not saying it's fair to you. Nothing about this is fair. His eyes returned to hers, dark and intense. But it's the truth. You asked for honesty, and that's what it is. I care because somewhere in all this darkness, you represent something my brother believed in. Hope, possibility, a future that isn't built on blood. Lena didn't know what to say to that. She didn't know how to reconcile the man who'd kidnapped her with the one currently, looking at her like she was something precious and fragile. So, she did the only thing that made sense in the moment. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his, sharing the breath, proximity, and strange intimacy of two broken people trying to figure out how to survive each other. We're a disaster, she whispered. Yeah, Ethan agreed. We really are. They stayed like that until Maria appeared with breakfast and a pointed look that suggested they needed to eat, and Ethan needed to rest more. The moment broke, but something had shifted between them. Something dangerous and inevitable and impossible to take back. The next week was a blur of activity that Lena observed from the margins. Ethan, despite his injury, threw himself into damage control with focused intensity. The two Morelli soldiers who'd been captured during the attack were interrogated. Lena didn't ask about the methods, and Ethan didn't volunteer details. They revealed that the attack had been coordinated with someone inside Ethan's organization, someone high-ranking enough to know schedules, security protocols, and access codes. The hunt for the second leak consumed Ethan's attention. He reviewed personnel files, scrutinized financial records, and conducted interviews that sometimes lasted for hours. Lena watched the paranoia eat at him, saw the way he second-guessed everyone around him, and withdrew into himself. He was sleeping even less than before, running on fumes and determination. 4 days after the attack, she told him he was going to make himself sick again. They were in his office, Lena having invaded his space with food Maria had prepared. Ethan hadn't left the room in 6 hours, hadn't eaten since breakfast, and looked like he was about 2 minutes from collapse. I'm fine, he said automatically, not looking up from his laptop. You're not fine, you're obsessing. She set the plate down in front of him and moved around to see what he was looking at. Financial spreadsheets, transaction records, patterns of behavior analyzed, down to the minute. Ethan, you need to step back. I can't step back. Someone in my inner circle is selling me out, and until I find them, everyone is in danger, including you. So, you're going to work yourself to death trying to protect me? That's your plan? If necessary, he said. Lena grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me. You're not thinking. You're injured, exhausted, and paranoid. That combination makes you vulnerable in ways that have nothing to do with leaks or federal investigations. You need to rest. I need to finish this. Why? What's driving you so hard that you can't take care of yourself? She searched his eyes and saw the fear underneath the determination. What are you really afraid of? Ethan's mask cracked. I'm afraid that I can't protect you. That whoever is betraying me will figure out you're here, will tell your father or the feds or my enemies, and I won't be able to stop what happens next. I'm afraid that I've put you in more danger by keeping you here than I would have by letting you go. And I'm afraid. His voice broke slightly. I'm afraid that I care more about keeping you safe than I do about the revenge I started this for. The confession hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Lena's hand softened on his face, her thumb tracing the scar along his jawline. Then let me help, she said quietly. I grew up in this world. I know how these organizations work, how people think, where the cracks show. Let me look at what you're looking at. Maybe I'll see something you've missed. He argued that she wasn't trained for this. No, but I'm not inside your head either. Fresh eyes might help. Ethan hesitated, then turned the laptop toward her. The highlighted transactions are the ones that don't match normal patterns. Small discrepancies, but enough to suggest someone's moving money carefully. The problem is, half my people handle finances at some level. I need to narrow it down. Lena studied the screen, her mind working. She'd watched her father's operation for years before leaving and had absorbed more about criminal finance than she'd ever wanted to know. The patterns Ethan was tracking were familiar. The careful movements, the shell companies, the timing designed to avoid triggering automated alerts. Look at the gaps, she said, pointing. Not the transactions themselves, but when they happen. There's a rhythm to normal money laundering. Payments go out on schedules. Returns come in at predictable intervals. But these, she traced a sequence, these are reactive. Someone's moving money in response to specific events. The warehouse raids, the Morelli attack, even the first leak with Vincent Russo. Ethan leaned closer, following her logic. You're right. I was looking at the amounts, trying to find the trail. But the timing. Someone knew these events were coming and positioned resources ahead of them, which means they're either very good at predicting your enemy's moves or they're orchestrating them. Orchestrating. Ethan's expression darkened. That's the pattern I've been missing. Someone inside isn't just leaking information. They're actively setting up attacks, coordinating with multiple hostile parties, trying to dismantle my organization from the inside. He asked who has the access to do that. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his face going carefully blank. 3 people, my chief of security, my financial officer, and my second in command. She asked which one he trusted most. All of them. That's the problem. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. These are people I've known for years. People who've saved my life, who've proven their loyalty that should have been definitive. Then, maybe it's not about loyalty. Maybe it's about leverage. Lena had seen this before with her father's organization. Does anyone have family in trouble? Debt they're hiding? Secrets that could be exploited? Ethan pulled up personnel files, scanning through them with new focus. His chief of security had a clean record, no obvious vulnerabilities. His financial officer was divorced and paying alimony, but nothing excessive. His second in command. He stopped. What? Lena asked. Thomas, Ethan's voice was flat. My second. He has a daughter. I helped him get her into a private school 2 years ago, paid the tuition when he was going through a rough patch financially. He pulled up more information. She's at Columbia, the same university as you. The implications hit Lena immediately. So, if someone wanted leverage against him, they'd threaten her, and he'd do anything to protect her, even betray me. Ethan's jaw clenched. I need to verify this before I act. If I'm wrong. But what if you're right? Lena leaned against the desk. What do you do then? What I have to do. What I always do. The coldness in his voice was back, the crime lord emerging from underneath the man she'd been getting to know. I removed the threat by killing him. By removing him, Ethan corrected. Killing isn't always necessary. Sometimes exile is more effective, and sometimes you're lying to yourself about what you're capable of. Lena crossed her arms. If he's been orchestrating attacks against you, if he's the reason you were nearly killed last week, you're not going to just send him away with a stern warning. Ethan met her eyes, not backing down. You're right. I'm probably going to kill him. Does that change how you see me? No. Lena said honestly, because I already know what you are. What I'm trying to figure out is whether you've ever considered being anything else. It's too late for that, is it? Because from where I'm standing, you've been making different choices lately. Protecting instead of attacking, showing mercy instead of violence. You let those Morelli soldiers live long enough to question them. The old, you would have killed them on sight. The old me didn't have someone watching, judging every decision. But there was no heat in his words, just resignation. You've complicated everything, Lena. Made me question instincts I've relied on for years. Good. You should question them. She moved closer, close enough to see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he carried. You said you cared about me. Prove it. Be someone worth caring about in return. I don't know if I can. Try anyway. The conversation was interrupted by Maria appearing in the doorway with an expression that suggested urgent news. Mr. Cross, Thomas is here. He says he needs to speak with you immediately. It's about the leak. Ethan's expression went carefully neutral. Show him in. When Lena started to leave, he told her to stay, but stay quiet. Ethan stood, moving around the desk with the controlled grace of a predator, preparing to strike. Let me handle this. Thomas entered a moment later. He was in his late 40s, graying at the temples, with the weathered look of someone who'd seen too much violence. He'd always been polite to Lena on the few occasions they'd crossed paths in the penthouse, but now she studied him with new eyes, looking for signs of betrayal. Thomas's voice was tense. We need to talk privately. Ethan replied that anything he could say to him could be said in front of Lena, calling her his guest. The way he said guest made it clear he was daring Thomas to contradict him. Thomas glanced at Lena, then back to Ethan. It's about the investigation into the leak. I found something. Evidence that points to. He stopped, his expression conflicted. It points to me. The admission hung in the air like a gunshot. Ethan's hand moved to his side where Lena knew he kept a weapon, even in his own penthouse. Explain, Ethan said, his voice deadly quiet. Someone's been setting me up. Moving money through accounts I have access to. Using my credentials to communicate with our enemies. Even planting evidence in my apartment. Thomas's hands were shaking slightly. I didn't see it until tonight when I got a call from someone I trust in the NYPD. They said the feds are building a case against me specifically, that they have transaction records, communications, everything they need to prove I'm your leak. And you're telling me this? Why? If you were actually innocent, running would make more sense than confessing, because I know you'll find the real evidence eventually, and because... Thomas's voice cracked. They have my daughter. Whoever's doing this, they grabbed Sarah from campus 3 days ago, sent me proof of life and instructions. If I didn't play along, if I warned you, they'd kill her. Lena's breath caught. She glanced at Ethan. Saw him processing this new information with rapid calculation. Ethan asked why he came to him now. Because I just got word that Sarah escaped. She managed to get away from her captors 2 hours ago and made it to a police station in Brooklyn. She's safe. Thomas met Ethan's eyes. So, I'm here to face whatever you decide I deserve, but I need you to know I didn't betray you willingly. And whoever did this, whoever orchestrated this entire setup, is still out there. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his hand still near his weapon. Lena could see him weighing options, calculating risks, deciding whether to believe Thomas or eliminate him as a precaution. Prove it, Ethan said finally. Prove you were set up, and I'll help you find who's really behind this. But if I find out you're lying, I'm not, I'll give you everything. My passwords, my accounts, my communications, full transparency. Thomas looked desperate, exhausted. You've been like a brother to me, Ethan. I would never betray you. Not for money, not for power. They knew that. So they found the one thing I couldn't sacrifice. Your daughter. My daughter. Ethan's expression softened infinitesimally. He asked where she was now. A safe house in Queens. I have people watching her, people I trust from outside our organization. Good. Keep her there. Ethan moved to his desk and pulled out a laptop. Start with your communications. Show me everything that looks suspicious. We're going to reverse engineer this setup and find out who was pulling the strings. Relief flooded Thomas's face. Thank you. I won't let you down. You already did by not coming to me sooner, but I understand why. Ethan glanced at Lena. Family makes us do things we wouldn't otherwise consider. It makes us vulnerable in ways that can be exploited. The look he gave her was loaded with meaning. Lena understood what he was really saying. She was his vulnerability now. His potential Thomas, the person who could make him compromise everything he'd built. And somehow, terrifyingly, she didn't mind being that for him. The work of unraveling Thomas's setup took 3 days of intensive investigation. Lena watched from the periphery as Ethan and Thomas traced digital breadcrumbs through layers of obfuscation, following money trails that looped through shell corporations and overseas accounts. They worked side by side with the focused intensity of men who knew their survival depended on finding the truth before it found them. What emerged was both simple and devastating. The real leak wasn't one of Ethan's inner circle. It was someone who'd never been on his radar at all. A mid-level associate named Danny Chen, someone so unremarkable that he'd been overlooked in every security review, had been feeding information to multiple parties for over a year. The feds, the Morellis, even Marcus Carter himself. How did we miss him? Thomas asked, staring at the evidence spread across Ethan's desk. Because he was smart enough to stay invisible, Ethan said, his voice cold with controlled rage. He played us all. He set you up as the obvious suspect, so we'd be looking in the wrong direction, while he consolidated his position. The kidnapping of your daughter, the attacks, the federal raids, all orchestrated to destabilize my organization enough that someone else would move in and take over. Who's backing him? Lena asked. She'd been sitting quietly in the corner, but the pieces were clicking together in her mind. Chen doesn't have the resources to coordinate all of this alone. Someone's funding him, protecting him. Ethan's jaw tightened. That's the question, and I think I know the answer. He pulled up a file and showed them financial records that traced back to a consortium of Ethan's competitors. Not just the Morellis, but 3 other families who'd been circling for years, waiting for weakness. Chen had been their inside man, their weapon, their ticket to dismantling Ethan's empire piece by piece. They were never going to just take over, Thomas said, understanding dawning. They were going to carve you up and split the territory. Smart of them. Avoid a war by coordinating the assassination. Ethan closed the laptop with deliberate calm. The only thing they didn't count on was Chen getting greedy and sloppy. The setup on you was too elaborate, too obvious. It made me look deeper instead of just pulling the trigger. So, what now? Thomas asked. Now. Ethan's smile was dangerous. Now we return the favor. The next 48 hours moved with brutal efficiency. Ethan didn't just neutralize Danny Chen, he turned him into a weapon against the very people who'd been backing him. With Thomas's help and information extracted from Chen before his unfortunate disappearance into the East River, Ethan orchestrated a counterattack that was surgical in its precision. False information was fed back through Chen's channels, making the consortium think their plan was working better than anticipated. Then Ethan struck, not with violence, but with something more devastating. He leaked evidence of the conspiracy to federal authorities, complete with financial records and recorded conversations that implicated all four families in everything from racketeering to murder. He triggered internal conflicts within each organization, exploiting existing tensions until they were too busy fighting each other to focus on him. And he made sure Marcus Carter was caught in the crossfire. Lena learned about that last part accidentally, overhearing a phone conversation Ethan was having with one of his contacts. Her father's name was mentioned casually, followed by details about warrants being issued, assets being frozen, and associates being arrested. When Ethan ended the call, he found her standing in the doorway. "You went after him anyway," she said. It wasn't a question. He replied that he told her from the beginning that destroying her father was the point of all this. "Did you think I'd changed my mind?" "I thought maybe." She stopped, not sure what she'd thought, that he'd chosen her over revenge, that their growing connection meant something more than his original plan. "I thought you were different now." "I am different, but that doesn't mean I'm giving up on justice for my brother." Ethan moved toward her, his expression conflicted. "Your father is going down, Lean. Not because I kidnapped you, not because of anything I did directly. He's going down because the federal case against him is airtight, built on evidence that has nothing to do with you. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison, and he'll never know you were here. But you orchestrated it, set it all in motion. Yes, and I'd do it again." He stopped in front of her. "I know you wanted me to be better than this, but I can't let what he did to David go unanswered. I won't." Lena's hand moved to her stomach, now slightly rounded at 10 weeks, visible when she wasn't wearing loose clothes. "So, where does that leave us? You got your revenge. The threat to your organization is eliminated. What happens to me now?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "That depends on what you want to happen." The question caught her off guard. "You're asking me? You've been here for almost 3 months. You know who I am, what I do, the darkness I'm capable of. You also know." He hesitated. "You know how I feel about you. That I care whether you stay or go, whether you're safe, whether the baby is healthy. So, I'm giving you a choice I should have given you from the start." "A choice?" Lena repeated, not quite believing it. "You can leave today if you want. I'll set you up with resources, money, a new identity, and protection from anyone who might come looking. You can go anywhere, start over completely, raise your child far away from this world, from your father, from me, or," he stopped, something vulnerable flickering across his face, "or you can stay. Not as my prisoner, as, I don't know what to call it. My partner, my responsibility, someone I want in my life, even though I have no right to ask." His hand found hers, tentative. "I know it's insane. I know you should run as far from me as possible. But I'm asking anyway, because the thought of you leaving, of never seeing you again, is worse than anything my enemies could do to me." Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment she'd been waiting for. The freedom she'd craved since the SUV grabbed her off that Columbia quad. She could walk out of here, disappear, and build the life she'd planned before everything went wrong. But that life felt like it belonged to a different person now. 3 months ago, she'd been a college student, pretending the first 24 years of her life hadn't happened. Pretending she wasn't Marcus Carter's daughter, pretending she could outrun genetics and history. Now she was pregnant, battle-hardened, and undeniably changed by her proximity to Ethan Cross. "I should leave," she said quietly. "I should take your offer and never look back." "Yes, you should," he replied. "But I keep thinking about something you said about my mother, drinking herself to death because she couldn't face what she'd married into. Couldn't find a way to survive the darkness." Lena met his eyes. "I don't want to be her. I don't want to run from hard things just because they're terrifying. And the truth is," she took a breath. "The truth is, I don't know who I am anymore without you. These 3 months, they've stripped away every illusion I had about myself. I'm not the girl who escaped her father's world. I'm the woman who survived being kidnapped, who learned to see the humanity in her captor, who's carrying a child and trying to figure out how to be brave enough for both of us." "Lena, I'm not finished," he said. Her voice was stronger now. "If I stay, it's not because I'm your prisoner or because I don't have options. It's because I'm choosing you, knowing exactly what that means. But I need something in return." When he asked what, she said she needed him to go legitimate, really legitimate. Not just shell companies and money laundering. "I need you to find a way to transition out of this life into something that won't get you killed or imprisoned." She squeezed his hand. "I can't raise a child in a world where gunfights happen in the living room. I won't. So, if you want me to stay, That's the price. Ethan looked stunned, like he'd expected her to ask for anything but that. You're asking me to give up everything I've built. I'm asking you to build something different, something David would have wanted. You said he believed in going legitimate, in using your resources for something other than violence. Do that for him, for me, for this baby who doesn't deserve to grow up the way I did. It's not that simple. I have enemies, obligations, people who depend on me. Then figure it out. You're one of the smartest people I've ever met. You orchestrated an impossibly complex revenge plot, dismantled a conspiracy against you, and kept me safe through all of it. You can figure out how to transition to legitimate business if you actually want to. Lena moved closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. The question is, do you want to? The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Ethan's face went through a series of expressions: doubt, fear, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like hope. David had a plan, he said finally, before he died. He'd been researching how to convert our assets into legitimate holdings, real estate development, tech investments, even a private security firm. He thought we could transition over 5 years, gradually divesting from criminal operations while building legal revenue streams. I told him it was naive. Was it? I don't know, maybe. But maybe. He stopped, gathering his thoughts. Maybe it's possible if I'm strategic about it. If I'm willing to burn bridges with people who won't accept the transition. If I can survive the vulnerability of going straight in a world that punishes weakness. You won't be alone. Thomas is loyal. Maria would follow you anywhere. And I. Lena hesitated, then committed. I know this world. I can help. Not with the violence, but with everything else. Strategy, negotiation, reading people. You said I would have made a good professor because I can make people care about things. Maybe I can make your enemies care about letting you go. That's not how this world works. Then change how it works. She touched his face, her thumb tracing the scar on his jaw. You're Ethan Cross. You've survived everything life has thrown at you. Survive this, too. Survive into something better. He caught her hand, pressed it against his chest where his heart was racing. If I do this, if I actually try and it fails, if my enemies see weakness and attack, if I lose everything trying to go legitimate, then we'll figure it out together. But at least you'll have tried. At least you'll have chosen something other than revenge and violence. Lena's voice was fierce now. Your brother died wanting you to be better. Don't waste that. Don't let his death be meaningless. Something broke in Ethan's expression. He pulled her against him, careful of her growing belly, and held her, like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to earth. Lena wrapped her arms around him, feeling his heart hammer against her cheek, feeling the weight of the decision he was making. Okay, he said finally, the word muffled in her hair. Okay, I'll try. I'll call in every favor I have, negotiate with every enemy, and do whatever it takes to transition out. But it's going to take time, months, maybe years. And it's going to be dangerous, I know. And you're sure you want to stay for it? You could still leave. Be safe somewhere, far from all of this, I'm sure. Lena pulled back enough to see his face. But I need to know, is this what we have, whatever this is it real? Or just trauma bonding and Stockholm Syndrome? Ethan's laugh was rough, almost broken. I don't know. Maybe it's both. Maybe it started as something toxic and became something else along the way. All I know is that I love you, Lena Carter. I love you in a way that terrifies me because it makes me vulnerable in ways I swore I'd never be again. And I know I have no right to that love, that I've done things that should make you run screaming, but it's real. Whatever else this is, that part is real. I love you too, Lena heard herself say, and realized with shock that it was true. I shouldn't. It's probably some kind of psychological damage that I'll need therapy to untangle. But I do, and I'm choosing to stay anyway, with my eyes open, knowing exactly what I'm getting into. He kissed her then, finally, after 3 months of careful distance and charged moments. It was gentle and desperate in equal measure, tasting like promise and danger, and a future tense. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Lena felt something settle in her chest. Not peace, but the kind of certainty that comes from making a choice you can't take back. So what now? She asked. Now? Ethan smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, it reached his eyes without shadows. Now we figure out how to build something neither of us knows how to build, together. The transition wasn't easy. Nothing about their situation was easy. Ethan spent weeks in negotiations that sometimes turned violent, buying his way out of obligations, settling debts, and making arrangements that let him exit the criminal world, without leaving a power vacuum that would start wars. He liquidated assets, transferred operations to carefully vetted successors, and burned bridges with people who'd been allies for years. Thomas became invaluable during the process, helping to identify which operations could be converted to legitimate businesses and which needed to be shut down entirely. The private security firm David had envisioned became their primary focus, a company that provided executive protection, cybersecurity consulting, and risk assessment to corporations and high-net-worth individuals. It was a natural transition for people with their skills, and it was completely legal. Lena helped where she could, though her growing pregnancy limited her mobility. She researched business structures, helped craft the narrative for why Ethan Cross was going legitimate, and even reached out to contacts from her Columbia days who knew about PR and reputation management. Slowly, painfully, they built something new from the ashes of what Ethan had been. Marcus Carter's arrest made national news 3 months after Thomas had been cleared. The charges were extensive: racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, tax evasion, and money laundering. The evidence was overwhelming, built from the information had fed to federal investigators through carefully anonymous channels. In prisons, he would spend the rest of his life in prison, and he never knew his daughter had been 30 floors above Manhattan, held by the man orchestrating his downfall. Lena felt complicated things when she saw her father's face on the news, being led away in handcuffs. Relief that he couldn't hurt anyone else. Grief for the father he'd never been. Guilt for the part she'd played, even passively, in his destruction. Ethan asked if she was okay, finding her watching the coverage. "I don't know. Is it wrong that I feel sad?" "No," he said. "He's still your father, even if he was a terrible one. Grief doesn't follow logic." He sat beside her, his hand finding her considerably rounder belly. At 5 months, the pregnancy was impossible to hide. He asked if she regretted staying. "No," she replied. "But I reserve the right to feel complicated things about complicated situations." Fair enough. They'd moved out of the penthouse 2 weeks earlier, relocating to a brownstone in Brooklyn that felt more like a home than a fortress. It had a small garden where Lena planned to plant vegetables, rooms that needed painting, and neighbors who nodded hello without knowing who Ethan had been before he went legitimate. It was normal in a way that felt almost alien after everything they'd been through. Doctor Reeves had confirmed the baby was healthy, a girl, if they wanted to know, which they did. Lena was already thinking about names, about nursery colors, about how to explain to her daughter someday that she was conceived before her mother was kidnapped, born into a relationship that started with violence and somehow transformed into something resembling love. It would be a complicated story, but then complicated seemed to be their theme. "I've been thinking," Ethan said one evening, 6 months after Lena had chosen to stay. They were in the brownstone's kitchen, Lena attempting to cook while Ethan tried to help without getting in the way. His security firm was thriving, built on reputation and competence rather than fear. The transition wasn't complete. There were still loose ends, still people who resented his exit, still moments when violence threatened to resurface. But they were managing, building something sustainable. Lena asked what he was thinking about, stirring a sauce that was probably going to burn despite her best efforts. About us, about making this official. He moved behind her, his arms circling her expanded waist. "I know the circumstances of how we got here are insane. I know we probably need years of therapy to process everything that's happened. But I want." He stopped, searching for words. "I want to marry you. Not because I'm trying to own you or control you, but because I want to build a life with you. A real one. With paperwork and shared bank accounts and arguments about whose turn it is to do the dishes." Lena's hand still on the spoon. "You're proposing now, while I'm burning marinara? I don't have a ring. I don't have a plan." His voice was rough with emotion. "I just know that you're the best thing that's ever happened to me, even though I found you in the worst possible way. And I want our daughter to grow up with parents who are actually committed to each other, not just two people stuck together by circumstance." Lena turned in his arms, careful of her belly. "You're terrible at romantic gestures." "I know. And this relationship is probably going to require decades of therapy. Definitely. And I'm still not entirely convinced we're not both suffering from some kind of shared trauma delusion. That's possible, too. But yes," Lena said, smiling despite herself. "Yes, I'll marry you because I'm apparently just as insane as you are, and because I want to build something real, too." Something that honors your brother's memory and proves, my mother was wrong about whether love can exist in darkness. Ethan kissed her, tasting like relief and promise, and the kind of hope that comes from surviving something you shouldn't have survived. Around them, the sauce actually did start to burn, filling the kitchen with smoke that set off the fire alarm and made them both laugh as they scrambled to open windows. It was messy and imperfect, and completely them. 7 months after Lena was taken, she stood in the brownstone's small garden and married Ethan Cross in a ceremony attended only by Maria, Thomas and his daughter Sarah, Dr. Reeves, and a justice of the peace who asked no questions about their unusual story. Lena wore a simple dress that accommodated her 32-week belly. Ethan wore a suit without blood on it. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising not perfection, but effort. To keep choosing each other, to keep building something better than what they'd come from, to prove that people could change if they wanted it badly enough. 3 weeks later, Lena gave birth to a daughter they named Hope. Partly for the future they were building, and partly because David had always said Hope was the one thing their world couldn't destroy. She was healthy and loud and perfect, and when Ethan held her for the first time, tears streaming down his face, Lena knew they'd made the right choice. All of them. The choice to stay, the choice to change, the choice to believe in something better than revenge. Their life wasn't a fairy tale. Ethan still had nightmares about his brother. Lena still struggled with guilt about her father, with fears about whether she was enough for the family she'd accidentally built. They fought about money and parenting philosophies, and whose turn it was to handle the 3 a.m. feeding. The transition to legitimate business was ongoing, complicated by people who didn't want to let go, and enemies who saw opportunity in vulnerability. But they were happy, imperfectly, complicatedly, messily happy. A year after Hope was born, they sat in their garden while she napped in a portable crib nearby, watching clouds drift across a blue sky that seemed impossibly vast for Brooklyn. "Do you ever regret it?" Lena asked. "Giving up the power, the empire, everything you built." Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes I miss the certainty of it, knowing exactly who I was and what I was capable of. But then I look at Hope, at you, at the Lick's life we've built, and I realize." He turned to her, his expression open in a way it never could have been before. "I realize David was right. There's more courage in building than destroying, more strength in choosing love over revenge. And I'd rather be the man who figured that out late than never at all." Good answer. I've had a good teacher. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter sleep, listening to the city breathe around them. Somewhere out there, Marcus Carter was in prison. Somewhere else, people who'd known Ethan Cross as a crime lord were probably still telling stories about the man who'd walked away. And here, in a Brooklyn garden that smelled like roses and fresh-cut grass, 2 people who had no business finding each other had built something worth protecting. It wasn't the ending Lena had imagined when that SUV grabbed her off a college campus. It wasn't even the ending she would have written if given the choice. But it was theirs. Hard-won, complicated, real, and in the end, that was enough. When Hope woke from her nap crying for attention, both parents moved simultaneously to comfort her. They stood together in the golden afternoon light, a family forged from trauma and choice in equal measure. And they were exactly where they needed to be. Not perfect, not innocent, but real and committed and still standing.